The snow was falling thick and fast, blanketing the countryside in a soft, eerie silence. Sarah Monroe pulled her coat tighter around herself as she stood at the gates of Whitaker Manor. It was an old house, towering and regal, yet strangely menacing with its dark, ivy-covered stone walls and shattered window panes. She hesitated before pushing open the iron gates, which groaned as if in protest. It had been years since she had been back to her hometown, and even longer since she'd thought about Whitaker Manor. The invitation she'd received had been unexpected, unsigned, and cryptic. "You are cordially invited to a New Year's Eve celebration at Whitaker Manor. Midnight holds the key to the past." She didn't know why she had come. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, or maybe it was the promise of answers to the questions that had plagued her for years. Questions about her childhood, her family, and the night her parents disappeared without a trace. The grand foyer of Whitaker Manor was dimly lit, its chandeliers swaying slightly in a phantom breeze. The walls were lined with faded portraits of the Whitaker family, their stern faces gazing down at her as if disapproving of her presence. There were others in the house. She could hear their murmurs and laughter echoing from the grand hall. As she stepped inside, a tall, wiry man in a suit greeted her. "Welcome, Miss Monroe," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. "I am Sebastian, the caretaker of Whitaker Manor. The other guests are in the ballroom. Please make yourself comfortable." Sarah nodded, her unease growing. She had not told anyone her name, yet this man seemed to know her. The ballroom was magnificent, though it carried the weight of decades of neglect. The guests were an odd mix, young and old, dressed in everything from modern evening wear to period clothing that seemed out of place. They mingled under the glow of an enormous tarnished chandelier. "Strange crowd," said a man standing next to Sarah. He was in his early 30s, with dark eyes and a nervous smile. "I'm Michael. Got one of those mysterious invitations too?" Sarah nodded. "Did yours mention the past?" Michael's face darkened. "It did. Something about the truth being revealed at midnight. Creepy, huh?" Before Sarah could respond, the clock struck 10, and Sebastian appeared at the head of the grand staircase. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying through the room, "tonight we honor the Whitaker legacy. Please enjoy yourselves. At midnight, the veil will lift, and all will be revealed." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to leave. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and the air grew colder with each passing hour. "Do you feel that?" Michael asked, rubbing his arms. "Like we're not alone?" Sarah whispered. A sudden crash echoed through the manor, silencing the chatter. Guests gathered in the foyer, where a large mirror had fallen from the wall and shattered on the marble floor. In the fragments of glass, Sarah thought she saw movement, a pale, flickering figure darting out of sight. "It's just the wind," Sebastian said, though his expression betrayed his calm words. "Please return to the ballroom." But the unease had taken root. Whispers began to spread among the guests, tales of the Whitaker family's tragic history, a father driven mad, a mother who vanished, and children who were said to have died under mysterious circumstances. At 11, the power flickered, plunging the manor into darkness for a moment. When the lights returned, one of the guests was missing. "Where's Eleanor?" a woman asked, her voice trembling. The group searched the ballroom and the adjoining rooms but found no sign of her. "She wouldn't just leave," Michael said. "Her coat's still here." A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the chandelier. Sarah felt a hand brush against her arm, but when she turned, no one was there. The air was thick with tension as a ghostly wail echoed through the halls. "What was that?" someone cried. "It came from upstairs," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Michael and a few others followed her as she ascended the grand staircase. The upper floors were even colder, and the air carried the scent of decay. "Eleanor?" Sarah called. They found her in the nursery, standing in front of a small wooden rocking chair. Her eyes were wide, her face pale, and her lips moved soundlessly. "Eleanor." Michael shook her gently, but she didn't respond. The rocking chair began to move on its own, creaking with each sway. "It's not safe here," Sarah whispered. Back in the ballroom, the remaining guests were in a state of panic. Eleanor was placed on a sofa, but she remained unresponsive, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. Sebastian appeared again, his face grim. "The manor is alive tonight," he said. "The Whitakers do not take kindly to intruders." "Then why invite us?" Sarah demanded. Sebastian hesitated before replying. "At midnight you will understand." The guests tried to leave, but the front doors refused to open. Windows were unyielding, and the house itself seemed to conspire against their escape. As the clock inched toward midnight, the haunting grew more intense. Ghostly figures appeared in the mirrors, whispers filled the air, and objects moved of their own accord. Sarah saw a childlike figure standing at the edge of the ballroom, its eyes hollow and black. "Do you see it?" she whispered to Michael. He nodded, his face ashen. "We're not getting out of here, are we?" When the clock struck midnight, the room went silent. The guests froze as a cold blue light filled the ballroom. Shadows coalesced into a figure. A woman in a tattered dress, her face a mask of sorrow. "I am Eleanor Whitaker," she said, her voice echoing. "This house is a prison, and now so are you." Sebastian stepped forward, his expression grim. "The truth has been revealed. The Whitakers demand justice, and you are here to pay the price." The guests screamed as the ground beneath them began to shake, and the room was plunged into chaos. The room quaked as Eleanor Whitaker's ghostly figure loomed over the terrified guests, her voice reverberating like thunder. "You have come to witness the sins of Whitaker Manor. None who tread here leave unmarked." Sarah clutched Michael's arm as the ghostly figure flickered and split into dozens of pale apparitions. Each one bore a resemblance to the faded portraits lining the walls of the grand hall. The guests, frozen in fear, huddled together as the air grew icy. "What does she mean?" Michael whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the blue light emanating from Eleanor dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. The apparitions vanished, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sebastian's calm voice cut through the quiet, "the hour of reckoning has begun." Before anyone could respond, the ballroom was replaced by a surreal landscape. The walls faded, replaced by a foggy, spectral world where the past seemed to bleed into the present. Ghostly figures of the Whitaker family moved around them, playing out fragmented scenes of torment and despair. Sarah watched as a young boy cried in a corner while a stern man, presumably the patriarch, Arthur Whitaker, berated him. The boy's sobs echoed through the room. "What is this?" Michael asked. "The manor is showing us its history," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. The ghostly scenes became more violent. A woman in a tattered dress clawing at the locked doors, children weeping in the nursery, and Arthur Whitaker pacing in his study, muttering to himself. "It's a curse," Michael whispered. "This family was cursed." Before anyone could respond, the ballroom was replaced by a surreal landscape. The walls faded, replaced by a foggy, spectral world where the past seemed to bleed into the present. Ghostly figures of the Whitaker family moved around them, playing out fragmented scenes of torment and despair. Sarah watched as a young boy cried in a corner while a stern man, presumably the patriarch, Arthur Whitaker, berated him. The boy's sobs echoed through the room. "What is this?" Michael asked. "The manor is showing us its history," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. The ghostly scenes became more violent. A woman in a tattered dress clawing at the locked doors, children weeping in the nursery, and Arthur Whitaker pacing in his study, muttering to himself. "It's a curse," Michael whispered. "This family was cursed." One by one, the guests were pulled into their own personal nightmares. Sarah watched as Michael was dragged into the fog by unseen hands, his screams fading into the distance. "Michael," she shouted, but her voice echoed uselessly. Then it was her turn. The room dissolved, and Sarah found herself in the nursery. The rocking chair moved on its own, creaking rhythmically. A child's laughter echoed through the room, chilling her to the bone. "Who's there?" she whispered. A ghostly child appeared before her, its face twisted in a grotesque grin. It held out a small broken doll. "Play with me," it whispered. Sarah backed away, her heart pounding. The walls of the nursery seemed to close in, and the child's laughter grew louder, more menacing. She shut her eyes, willing the vision to end, but the air around her grew colder, and the child's icy hands gripped her arm. "You can't leave," it hissed. "No one leaves." The nightmare ended as suddenly as it began, and Sarah found herself back in the ballroom with the remaining guests. They looked pale and shaken, their eyes haunted. Sebastian stood at the center of the room, his face grim. "The manor has spoken," he said. "Those who remain must carry its burden." "What burden?" Sarah asked. Sebastian gestured to Eleanor, who appeared once more, her spectral form flickering like a dying flame. "The Whitakers were cursed by their greed and cruelty," she said. "Their sins bound them to this place, and now, so are you." "No," Michael said, stepping forward. "We didn't do anything wrong." "You entered," Eleanor replied. "That is enough." The guests erupted into chaos, shouting and pleading for mercy. But the apparitions were unmoved. The clock struck midnight, and the room fell silent once more. Eleanor's form grew brighter, illuminating the terrified faces of the guests. "You will bear the weight of our memories," she said. "You will carry our pain into the world so that we are never forgotten." One by one the guests collapsed, their bodies racked with visions of the Whitaker family's torment. Sarah felt her mind fracture as memories not her own flooded her consciousness. The cold, unyielding anger of Arthur, the fear and desperation of the children, and the sorrow of Eleanor, who had tried and failed to save her family. When Sarah awoke, she was lying in the snow outside Whitaker Manor. The house was silent, its windows dark. Michael and the others were gone. Days later, Sarah returned to her apartment, but she was not the same. The memories of Whitaker Manor haunted her every waking moment, and the whispers of the dead echoed in her mind. She tried to warn others about the manor, but no one believed her. And on New Year's Eve, as the clock struck midnight, she found herself standing at the gates of Whitaker Manor once more, unable to resist its call. The cycle had begun again. Sarah stood at the iron gates of Whitaker Manor, the weight of countless memories crushing her. The frigid wind bit at her skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the chill inside her chest. She didn't remember how she had arrived here. One moment she was trying to fall asleep in her cramped apartment. The next, she was back at the manor, her feet dragging her closer to its ominous facade. The windows were dark, reflecting the starlit sky like black mirrors. But Sarah knew the truth. The house was awake, watching her, waiting for her to step inside. She wasn't alone. Faint footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. She turned to see a small group of strangers approaching, 4 men and women, their faces pale with apprehension. "Are you here for the party?" one of them asked nervously, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a scarf pulled tightly around his neck. Sarah's heart sank. The manor had called to them too. "No," she said, her voice trembling. "You have to leave. This place isn't what you think." But the others exchanged uneasy glances, their curiosity outweighing their fear. "Come on," a young woman in a red coat said. "It's just an abandoned house. What's the worst that could happen?" Sarah wanted to scream, to force them to turn back. But the manor seemed to pull her closer, its influence too strong to resist. As if in a trance, she followed the group up the frozen steps and into the house. The heavy door creaked open, and the darkness inside swallowed them whole. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and dust. The grand chandelier above them flickered to life, casting an eerie glow on the dilapidated interior. "This place is incredible," the man with glasses said, stepping forward to inspect a dusty portrait of Eleanor Whitaker. "It's like stepping into another century." "You have no idea," Sarah muttered under her breath. The others explored the foyer, their laughter echoing faintly. They didn't see the shadows shifting in the corners or feel the icy presence that had settled over the room. Sarah wanted to warn them again, but her voice caught in her throat. The manor wouldn't let her. A low hum filled the air, and the door slammed shut, sealing them inside. The chandelier dimmed, and a cold wind whipped through the room. "What was that?" the woman in the red coat asked, her voice quivering. Before anyone could answer, the familiar figure of Eleanor Whitaker materialized at the top of the grand staircase. Her pale, translucent form glided downward, her hollow eyes fixed on the newcomers. "Welcome to Whitaker Manor," she said, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "You have come to bear witness." The newcomers froze, their faces etched with fear. "This can't be real," one of them whispered. Eleanor ignored them, her gaze settling on Sarah. "You have returned," she said. "The chosen one." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't choose this." "You were marked," Eleanor replied. "You carry the memories of the dead. You cannot escape." "What do you want from me?" Sarah demanded. Eleanor raised a ghostly hand, and the walls around them dissolved into a swirling mist. The group found themselves in the dining hall, seated at the long table. The rotten food and tarnished silverware were gone, replaced by an elaborate feast. Goblets of wine sparkled in the candlelight, and the scent of roasted meat filled the air. "Eat," Eleanor commanded. "I'm not touching that," the man with glasses said, pushing his plate away. Eleanor's eyes glowed with a malevolent light. "You will partake, or you will suffer." As the guests reluctantly ate, the room began to shift. Shadows moved across the walls, and ghostly figures appeared at the edges of the hall. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest as memories flooded her mind. She saw Arthur Whitaker pacing in his study, muttering incantations from an ancient book. He had summoned something, a dark force that promised wealth and power in exchange for loyalty. But the entity demanded more than Arthur had bargained for. It fed on the souls of the Whitaker family, binding them to the manor for eternity. "This is your legacy," Eleanor said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The curse cannot be broken. It can only be passed on." The walls of the dining hall crumbled, revealing a vast, swirling void. The table and chairs disintegrated, and the group found themselves standing on the edge of a precipice. Eleanor appeared before them, her form more solid now, her face etched with anguish. "Only one of you may leave," she said. "The rest must stay to bear the curse." Panic erupted among the group as they realized the gravity of her words. "This is insane," the man with glasses shouted. "We didn't ask for this." "You entered willingly," Eleanor replied, "and now you must choose." The void pulsed, and tendrils of darkness reached out, wrapping around the newcomers. Sarah felt the weight of the memories in her mind, the voices of the dead urging her to act. "You know what must be done," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Sarah. The walls of the dining hall crumbled, revealing a vast, swirling void. The table and chairs disintegrated, and the group found themselves standing on the edge of a precipice. Eleanor appeared before them, her form more solid now, her face etched with anguish. "Only one of you may leave," she said. "The rest must stay to bear the curse." Panic erupted among the group as they realized the gravity of her words. "This is insane," the man with glasses shouted. "We didn't ask for this." "You entered willingly," Eleanor replied, "and now you must choose." The void pulsed, and tendrils of darkness reached out, wrapping around the newcomers. Sarah felt the weight of the memories in her mind, the voices of the dead urging her to act. "You know what must be done," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Sarah. When Michael and the others awoke, they were lying in the snow outside Whitaker Manor. The house was dark and silent, its oppressive presence gone. Michael looked back at the manor, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "She saved us," he whispered. But as the group stumbled away, the faint sound of a clock striking midnight echoed through the air. Somewhere deep within the manor, Sarah's voice whispered, "Happy New Year. Thank you for listening to my story. If you want to hear more scary stories, please like and subscribe to my channel.